6 brothers and sisters, and 9 of us that in the early 70s that their son would be a vice president representing over 200,000 people in a historically Jewish organization. Most people would not think that that would be possible at the time, historically, but it only shows that the dedication of educators that are forward-thinking, that are inclusive, that believes in opportunity for all students only allowed me to be where I am today. So with that, I believe in ensuring that in my role, I pay that forward and make sure that I turnkey that and really focus. And that's why this conversation about access is a very important conversation. When we think about access for young people, it's not just simply one of the things that we do in New York when we think about access is how do we create a culture, not just in an individual school, but in a district that has an expectation for students that they will actually go to whatever their related school choice is. They will receive exposure to opportunities following their graduation. For so many of our kids, that is not what normally happens in terms of the process. So what we want to be able to do is how do we build that culture, and how do we provide those opportunities for students, and not just in terms of going in their career path. When we think about high school and think about a CTE continuum, that's part of how do we have a college-ready culture, and how do we create individual college and career plans for young people. Just like with students with disabilities, we have individual educational plans, IEPs. Every student needs an IEP or an educational and a career plan these days, right? And I would venture to say that in these trying times, adults may need that as well. So one of the things in terms of my conversation with all of you is what have we done in terms of New York that you can sort of take away and discuss in your focus groups that may be something that you'll be able to implement. So in New York City, believe it or not, we thought about equity and access for a very long time. So I'm going to look at it from 3 buckets that we had an approach in terms of our expansion. Number 1, that's access to programs. How do we make sure that more kids have access to programs? How do we create structural changes that's going to allow for more access? How do we with that, how do we expand the number of programs, which is what we've done in New York City, and how do we change the law so that there's transparency, so that it's not just someone saying that we've done something, it's actually transparent for everyone to see, to make sure that that equity and access is actually readily available. So let me just cover those kinds of pieces. So one of the things that we took in terms of our approach in terms of access, how do we do it and what do we do to achieve that? The first thing we did was we assessed all of our programs. When I first came on board in 2009 as vice president, we literally had only 22 designated career and technical education schools, and we only had very few programs. We just had 22 schools that were designated, and it only touched about 27,000 kids. Now, New York City is the largest school system in the nation. We have approximately 1,800 schools, and so 1,800 schools, that's a drop in the bucket in terms of the number of schools. But one of the things that we did in terms of assessing that in 2009, today we have 47 designated schools, and we have over 300 plus programs approved in 130 academic high schools, and we touch 163,000 students or more in New York City. So that over the last 11 years was a major expansion and push we did to provide more access to kids. And when we think about access, we're talking about not just students with disabilities, English language learners, we're talking about overage undercredited students as well. We're talking about women and young ladies in non-traditional trades. These are all things that we want to talk about when we think about access, not just a narrow group. Those are all specialized populations. So quickly, in terms of what we've done, we looked at what were the strengths and weaknesses of our program when we assessed them, the current program, and how they were delivering CTE. We analyzed the gaps in performance. Not all programs are equal. Some do well, some do not do well. But how do we help develop strategies so that they can improve? We also identify steps to make progress towards student success. So it's student driven. And how do we connect them with the understanding that CTE is a continuum and it connects to their post-secondary studies as well as employment. In addition to that, in our evaluation, we also evaluated the recruitment, the training, and the professional learning for teachers, and also as well as in these underrepresented groups. So that became an important caveat that we did. In the program that I was involved in that Candace talked about in my introduction, that was a program that was dealing with equity when they knew there was going to be a shortage in the early 80s of vocational teachers. Now, I always wanted to say, when we were talking about the Word Perfect conversation, Word Perfect came after a software called Word, which was Microsoft Word in 1979. I think Word Perfect was released, and that was to introduce computers in secretarial studies. Believe it or not, New York City, in a school called Grace Dodge, was a pilot to introduce computers in the secretarial study. When everyone was studying Greg, and that was supposed to revolutionize secretarial studies as we know it. Fast forward, there's a computer on every desk, right? So that was one thing when we think about what does that look like in terms of program as structural changes that we made in New York City, the second area. We made some significant structural changes. Like, unlike in many districts and some where folks use consultants, they use others to be able to apply for program approval and look at program quality. We actually engage, and obviously we're a union, so we believe in engaging our members. So we actually engage teachers that actually were literally the ones that write their programs, and they actually write what their application is when they submit it for the state for approval. So we actually work with them. We build out our advisory council. In New York, we have a robust advisory council team that makes up of the leading corporations, whether it's Microsoft, Apple, Adobe, big companies. It's a huge market of companies. They sit on our advisory council, and they actually work with and set the priorities on where we need to go by way of labor market information, trends, professional development for teachers. They sponsor and support the competitions for our young people as well. And one of the things that we worked with the advisory council was to, when new requirements were changing, how do we help and make sure that teachers are part of the conversations every single step of the way? And how do we have representation in those rooms? Also, how do we prioritize what are going to be the priority, not just from that advisory council, but for all of the teachers that and all of the folks in the city. So their priority was, how do we articulate industry needs? How do we provide technical assistance and support and build capacity? How do we create post-secondary pathways, not just after high school, but the post-secondary all the way to employment? And how do we support a talent development pool in high growth industries? So that's one of the things that we've done by way of our advisory council. As I said before earlier, program expansion was an important piece too. How do we make sure that we expand the number of programs and not just based on one of the things that we did in New York, which was a mistake for many years, is that we built programs based on student interest. Right? So let me give you an example. Remember, like when we were in, and that was a wrong approach. For example, when in the 80s, when you had LA Law, The Practice, Boston Legal, those television programs was a big hit, and everybody wanted to be a lawyer. So America built a lot of lawyers based on those shows. Fast forward, we had, CHOP, the Food Network, all of those things, and most people wanted to become culinary experts. So when it came to those kinds of things, so what we decided to do is that we had to start to look at labor market information and what was the structure of New York City and where were the jobs and the high demand jobs. And that's what we focused on when we built out programs, and how do we make sure that geographically they were not just in affluent communities, they were actually in communities, in underserved communities as well. And that's a big fight, because with redistricting and all of these kinds of things that's happening, it's a constant battle in terms of what we're doing. Okay, so that was the last, and then last but not least, although we made many progressive, we had a huge agenda, we made progress, we had investments in it. One of the things that we pushed for as a union was that how do we make sure that we change the law to make sure that it was fully transparent, that we made sure that we were touching all of the people that we said that we were going to touch. And if not, we had areas that we needed to focus. So we actually looked at we created what is known as a local law. Matter of fact, I should have put that in the chat. I don't have it in front of me, but I think that would have been something. That law, what it forced the Department of Education, what we had to do by way of Department of Education is that they had to be transparent about what they were delivering in terms of the school system. They couldn't just say, well, you know what, I'm going to, we did everything that we could. That law forced them, and I actually, I believe I put it in the chat for everyone to look at. That law forces the Department of Education to literally have to report out every year to the city council all aspects of CTE in 7 categories, not just from program characteristics and enrollment. It's number of percentages of students in each program, the number of students in each community district, the number of applications, the admissions, the graduation rates, the full-time, part-time teachers, students with disabilities, L's, demographics. All of those things are important, and that is what we guide our work on in terms of where are the deficiencies, what we are doing positively, but also what is it that we need to do in terms of moving forward. So those are just like 4 points that we've been able to do. And I know New York, we've been recognized for a lot of the work that we've been doing around the country in terms of pushing some high quality CTE programs. Many of them, we have the flagship schools, the aviations and planes, trains, and automobiles, where we literally have schools that have planes, right? And we have schools that have trains in the schools. So they represent the standards that industry is setting, and it's in partnership with the standards that we're building our programs in New York City. But it's more important, not just the building out of the program, is making sure that all kids have access. So this is an important conversation. I am open for any, I know it's a short period of time, but any questions that you guys might have, I'll be more than happy to engage in those questions. But I thank you for the opportunity to share with you what we're doing in New York.
I had a quick question for you, Mr. Robinson.
Sure, Sterling is fine.
So I know you spoke about like the advisory council.
Yes.
Different, people have had different level positions like Adobe and all those different bigwigs and everything.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about how you advocated for teachers. Can you just describe like sort of how those meetings go? What does it feel like to be in that space and to be speaking with those people directly in those types of things?
I think educators bring a perspective to industry that they may not have realized, right? It's almost like when we transition from traditional setting to a remote setting. Remember those days where everyone thought that they could teach? If you can't do anything else, we're going to teach. All those cliches and all those things. One of the things that we found out overnight is that it's very difficult to teach. Folks have learned that overnight around the world, right? That teaching is difficult. But one of the things that we bring to a perspective of industry is that they understand, at least in the conversations, what teachers bring to the table. I think one of the challenges that we don't have, because teachers are doing so much, and educators, whether you're a school leader or district leader, superintendent, wherever you may sit in the education spectrum, we're not necessarily interacting with business folks. So one of the advocacies that what we've done by saying advocate is that we invited them in. Some folks thought I was crazy inviting industry folks to the table and Michael Mulgrew, our president, and starting a CTE advisory council in New York City and codifying it in the law. They thought he was crazy. Like, why would a union engage in folks that totally disagree with us almost on all aspects? But we live in a society where we each at some point have to depend on other one. We may not like what the Gates Foundation may do, but we're typing our dismay on Microsoft Office. So we still are connected in one way, shape, or form. So bringing folks to the table and finding ways in which we want to work and what teachers do all the time is the way we've been able to do that. So that's one of the things that we've done. And now all of a sudden we are part of their agenda. And that should be something that is something that we should all be thinking about wherever we sit. A great question. Any others? I'm open. What I can say though is that it's not easy, right? In terms of doing this work, right? So it's not, but it's also, what we have to also realize is that this work is not one person. This is an army of folks that has to do this work. Like I say to many teachers and many of our members, that the times are so challenging. No matter how much education that you acquire personally, no matter how much skill that you gather, there's no way that you can educate kids by yourself. It takes a whole village. It is too hard of work and too much to be done that one person, no matter how incredible you might be, is still not enough without a network. And this conversation that you guys are having here is an important way to move towards that and having discussions, best practices, seeing what other folks are doing, and then sharing out those things. So I'm glad to be a part of this conversation.
There's a question in the chat. The question is, have you seen impact in your students' economic sustainability post-graduation, and specifically with employment?
So one of the things that we've done in New York City, and it took a while, but I've always said that in teaching, we keep teaching with the hope that we did enough for kids to learn and get a job and be successful in their career. When we don't have to do that anymore. We know exactly what the job market looks like in the future. There are some unknown jobs that we don't know that will come up, right? But there are some jobs that have qualifications that we can map kids to. We can career map them to a job and say to their parents as well as themselves, these are the qualifications that it takes for you to become a carpenter. This is the education you need if you want to be a broadcaster. This is what you want to have to do if you want to be a cybersecurity expert. And map that out so that students and parents are aware of what that looks like. And working with the colleges and universities. So the impact of that in New York City is that we have the highest graduation rate. We have about an 82.3 graduation rate, which is higher than our entire city average in CTE programs. We have the highest graduation rate. People were stunned that we consistently have the highest graduation rate. What people also don't know, we have the highest level of college retention, meaning kids stay in college. We also have a number where kids don't graduate with college debt because they're able to have a skill and pay for that. So we are literally now capturing that data post-secondarily as well as by industry so that we can make sure that we can make some improvements early on. And we're reaching down to the middle school to introduce CTE in that way. So there has been some dramatic impact in terms of student outcomes. But there's also a double-edged sword. I must say this and must share this with all of you. Our biggest problem when it comes to access, that's one word, but we combine access to equity. One of the challenges that we've seen in New York City, many of you may or may not know in New York City with the changes that are going on, and more communities are being that are affluent communities. Many of our CTE programs are now being pushed in affluent communities. Many of our folks are still thinking of CTE as the old vocational education and only believe that there's a one pathway to success. They have to go to college, and it just means that kids all should have the opportunity to go to college, but not every child is going to go at the same time, at the same minute, and so we have to fight to ensure that there's equity, that programs are designed that all kids have access to it. That's our fight every day in New York City, and we made progress in terms of doing that. But we've also seen where more affluent areas, Manhattan, we have some incredible programs, but they are being propped up, they're popping up in affluent communities, and many of our communities are being left out. So as a union, that's our fight with our members, and that's why it's important for them to be involved. Great question as well.
And thank you so much, Sterling, for your wisdom and your sharing your experience with us. We want to take this conversation on to the breakout rooms. So you're welcome to join us in one of the breakout rooms. And then you'll have about 10 minutes to share out. We may cut it a little shorter. Let's do about 7 minutes. And then we'll come out and do a whole group share out. So we're trying to share with some of the takeaways we have from this and maybe some things that we want to do with intention. Ray, if whenever you're ready, you can move us out to the breakout rooms. And again, Sterling, thank you so much. We appreciate you being a part of this workshop.
Thank you all.
Candace, I'm going to be your note taker.
Okay. Oh, so this is the third breakout room. Okay.
Yep.
I was making sure. I was like, oh, is this the third or the what? Gotcha. All right, everyone. Hold on. Let me get my questions real quick. I was just looking at them. And so to move us along, thank you again, first of all, Sterling, for your knowledge. Anytime I've ever read anything about New York with CTE, is always such a treat and interesting thing to learn about the things that you all do. And so for the group, a few things to talk about. First of all, so everyone, how do you see access implemented in your area? So at your school, where you work, all those different types of things.
First of all, what do you mean by access? Access to what?
It can be access to your programs, access to work-based learning opportunities, anything that has to do with how our students are able to participate, take advantage of career and technical education within our space.
I'll go. Afternoon, everybody. So first of all, I do want to apologize to Mr. Roberson. One of my teachers was calling, so I was double dutying while you were in conversation. So I do apologize for missing your address. So I will look at the recording at a later date. Because New York does intrigue me in terms of its population size and how you all are able to implement such implement CTE to the point where those old ideas still linger. Trying to shift people's thinking of CTE as an access to various opportunities and pathways versus just for the non-smart kids, which is something that we deal with even here in DC. And DC used to be a city that had strong CTE populations and programs prior to now. So I just wanted to preface that now. As far as access with us at Ballou, so I am one of the two directors, NAP directors at Ballou. And I think access for us is growing daily. As I have programs that are new to the building, and then we're in this global pandemic. So I think access for us is an ongoing conversation. How can we shift the school's focus to CTE and understanding that CTE can incorporate and encompass the academics, the core four, and it can incorporate industry, it can incorporate service, it can incorporate all those things, project-based learning. So I just think that CTE from that perspective and access from that perspective is an ongoing conversation that we have every day. And it's something that is a push and pull for people that don't quite understand that you can still get rigorous instruction, rigorous opportunities for your students to learn those same concepts and standards within their ELA, their math, or social studies and science classes, they can bubble over into a mass media, an entrepreneurship, an IT, automotive service, or culinary arts class. So long story short, and I'm a talker, our conversation is an ongoing thing. How can we create opportunities that give students pathways to careers in various ways versus you got to go to college and that's the only way?
Can I jump in and say quickly that part of it in many of our communities, like New York City, just like Washington, D.C., we have some schools that have been around for 75 years. Right, and one of the things that happens, and I'll put my advocacy hat on in terms of NAACP. Many of our colleagues and our family and friends come from inner communities, and they went to some of the schools that were the vocational schools that's in their neighborhoods. And the schools look the same as they did when it was built in 1940. They look at their life and reflect on their life, and they say, "Look how Sterling ended up. Terrible. We're in the same community. We are still don't have the access. Many times they are not inside of the buildings and seeing the augmentations that are happening because many of them are not invited in. We don't have open houses to invite the community in so they can see that there's a cyber program, that they can see that it's not the program of the 70s or the 60s or the 50s that they thought it was. So part of that work is having that ad campaign and getting everyone to understand and speak CTE. One of the things that we do in New York City, no one can come to me without saying CTE. And that puts everybody on that, and they become the advocates for us. So the point well taken, but it is an ongoing effort but it's understandable based on historical perspectives too.
Definitely. I think it's that combination of Booker T and W.E. Du Bois and put them together because they're both relevant in today's society. It's just how relevant are they for this particular student as opposed to that student. But I think both frames of thought are relevant and are appropriate for where we are today.
Yes, I would agree. Actually, I'm going to have my community college students do the debate for divorce in Washington next week. That's going to be fun. But Sterling said something very important that I've been meditating on, and I don't know if Calvin or other folks, especially the people who have new buildings, do you think, and some of us weren't in the old, but maybe you've talked with people who knew about the old buildings and stuff, right? And it's so interesting. I often talk to people here in the city. A month does not go by that someone says that we don't have CTE programs anymore in DC. They said we don't have any more trade programs or vocation. They closed all the programs. It's like, what are you talking about, man? That's my job. But the other part of that, that is an interesting thought process that what is in the new space and now DC is quite a bit the opposite. Everybody on this call has probably had an open house. We have tons of open houses. We have, we send out social media and everything. And sometimes our community engages and sometimes they don't. But it has been an interesting space of, is it really, sometimes I think, is it the access or the knowledge? And whether the two intersect with each other. Because sometimes it is access. There are some programs that are in parts of the city that kids may or may not be able to get to, or other opportunities. Sometimes we have them and people don't know.
What I was going to say is I think just being a native Washingtonian, people often associated CTE with Washington because it was like the spot for CTE. And when that closed, then in their minds, it's still closed, right? Because they don't see much evidence to the contrary.
Yes, I can believe that too. So Crystal, how are we going with time? Where'd she go? So another part of our conversation is what can we do, or what action steps, or what role do we think that we play in this whole conversation about access? Anybody?
I'm going to jump in and answer or participate and say that I think part of it is for us to to become informed ourselves. Like you can't talk or advocate with something that you're not well versed in yourself. Like, the question was, what is access? Well, it's something different to everyone depending on your environment and the resources you have. Access looks different for me here than it did, or for my students here, than it did when I was in North Carolina. Whereas money might not necessarily be, and people willing to come into the schools and do the work in DC, in North Carolina, you may have other things, but you don't have a lot of the money and that sort of access. So I think becoming informed in what access looks like for your students, and so that you can be an advocate in your space, in your environment, and in your school community first.
Repeat the question again, Candace, because I was going to jump in, but I don't want to be the hog. I'm a talker. So
what I learned about that, it was social equity. That's the word people use. Not talking too much, but it's fine. What is our role with access? Because to Crystal's point, it does look different. A lot of states don't. A lot of states, we have a lot of great things in place that other states and school systems don't. And so someone might even say that we don't even have access issues, right? But I could think of some things, like I said, even facilities, technology, all sorts of things that I think could be better across the board. So what does helping with access look like to you in your role?
Access for me, and the way that I perceive it, is soliciting myself to the community, literally. I've gone to ANC meetings and people don't know what Ballou has, and it's right around the corner. Literally, that big building on the hill. No one knows what goes on sometimes. So it's interesting that, what people don't know, you have to bring to them, because they may not. Some schools are the hub for their communities, and that's what I think our schools, or at least my school, is trying to become, a hub. So then the community then feels a part of what's going on in the school, and that then creates access to what's going on inside. So like the little things like opening up the track, people start coming on your grounds. Then they become familiar with what's going on at the school. Hey, I see they're having X, Y, Z. So just like, I think opening up your school, going out into the community and letting it be known what's going on is a big access point for people. We go to ANC meetings, we go to community meetings, we do all these type of things as CTE directors, representing the school, feeder fairs, Ed Fest, all these other things, just kind of promoting the school. So I think access can definitely show up when you are embedded within your community structure.
I think somebody brought this up before, but we need more support at the school level, I think, for what we're doing, because too often it seems like we're just kind of there, and it's not really reflected in the identity of the school as much as it perhaps should be for the visibility and the access that we want. And I think that websites should be up to date, and materials should be included in there. And also, I think the school's missions need to change, and DCPS's mission really needs to change, because there's too much focus on the college, the college pipeline. We can put students into jobs that do not require a ton of student debt, and I think that's something that we need to embrace all the way to ACTE.
All right, anyone else in regards to your role? Thank you, Chris. You always have something insightful to say. Anybody else have any thoughts? Especially, again, looking at who you are and your roles, in your positions. What could what can you do? What can you advocate for? I know in my role at ACTE, that's a big part of my job, is ensuring that we have, equity and accessibility with our programs of study, and also thinking about what is CTE 2.0. We've done a lot of building here in CTE in the last few years with DC. But I think the next thought of it is, what is CTE 2.0 for us and in this space? Anyone else?
I think there's power in partnerships. I was fortunate enough to sit in on a talk with some students from Woodson today and with professionals from Visa. And the kids were so absolutely phenomenal in how they engaged in that space. I was like, let me go back to the classroom. They were just so impressive. And by the end, all these people wanted to do all these great things for them. But it's because, that partnership that was being, even at least that first point of connection. So you guys were talking about people in the community, but I think these corporations and organizations too don't know or have assumptions about who we have in our classrooms, what their goals are. There was, a young lady in there that talked about wanting to do biotechnical engineering. I'm pretty smart. I don't really know what that is, but it sounds impressive. So I'm sure everybody.
That sounds like my dog. That sounds like Jameson talking
Oh,
about. I don't know what biotech is, but I think I want to do the biotech program.
Yeah, but it's amazing in not knowing. And I have an assumption about what I think it is, but I think it's amazing for people to see our students and see that their aspirations are just as big as any other kid in any other district. And once those first points of connections are made, who knows what doors that open? By the end, they were talking to the instructors like, yeah, we want to come in and mentor your kids, and we, tell us what they need. A lot of people say that, but once you sit in the kid's face and you see that they have goals, you just want to help them reach. So I think that first point of connection needs to be made from everyone. I don't think it's a NAF leader or an academy leader's job. I don't think it's a CTE director's job solely. Just it's part of our job. It's all of our responsibility to create those moments where we can connect our students to people who can create opportunities for them.
Can I add to your point? Oh, go.
Oh, my bad. Okay, I'll give it right back to you, Cal. I think that's a great point. And to piggyback off of that, and I think that really goes back to what you first said, Crystal, in terms of access. It starts like with the things that we know and the things that we have access to. I think the fact that we, as the educators, that networking ability, or like we know these people, or we come in contact with these individuals, and we have the opportunity to draw that connection from the get-go. It's interesting because we meet each other. I mean, we meet these people on such a regular basis. I play golf, for example. So I meet people all the time. And it may be people that my students never get the opportunity to meet. The conversations that I'll have on the golf course, like me having this information, well, the only way that my students will find this out is if I let them know, or if I rub elbows with the right person, then I invite them. Otherwise, my school doesn't know this, or the inside information of me figuring out what is the engineer you said you didn't know what it was, the
biotechnical engineering.
Yeah, so if I'm playing golf with a biotech engineer and I'm picking his brain and getting this information, then I feel like it's my duty. Hey, you mind stopping over and letting these people know? Otherwise, how else would we hear that?
I'm telling you now, I'm a shameless dater. I've had a couple of people that I've met on Tinder. They've not been great boos, but I said, you are engineer? Can you come speak on a panel? I have no shame at all.
Real life.
I think you can.
That's the heart I need you to have anyway. So if you can't come,
look, like the kids say, no cap.
So I'm glad you said CTE 2.0. Part of 2.0 is that we also have to let kids lead into things that they are into. One of the things that we did in this pandemic is that kids want to know about the environment. In New York City, we had 75,000 kids that skip school to go down to Manhattan for the World Earth Day March, right, on the environment. So what are the culinary teachers teaching? They're teaching, what about food deserts, right? Why is it in economically disadvantaged communities there's so much fast food but no real food? How does the environment impact in culinary? What does that look like in terms of food around the world? So teachers what we've done is establish communities by sector-based communities where teachers can get together and talk to be able to have best practice and conversations with their students about social issues, criminal justice issues. What does that look like in the law enforcement agent in business? What does that really look like? All of the things that kids really are talking about, that they are advocating for, some of it, and how do they see we have a big homeless situation here. kids got together in a challenge base to be able to develop an app so that homeless people can identify where they can go to communicate and have shelter, being in temporary housing. So some of these things, the kids are creative, but we have to connect them to a lot of the things that they may want to do as well.
That's actually a great
thing
that
that
our developing CTSOs. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. You can speak.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say that I want to piggyback up on Christopher was saying, Mr. Fraser. Basically, the most important thing that 2.0 would be more mentorship with these kids. Having an adult get involved with the kid, other than his teacher, is significant. It'll lead the kid to get advice or anything else like that. It seems that social interaction and things of that nature. The kid's interested in engineering, what kind of, have a conversation with someone else and you get help with certain things. That's something that I found that has helped out immensely with my students. They're quite brilliant. I'll be the first one to say that, but their mind is organized whichever which way. But mentorship, getting more adults involved and being able to hook into these kids makes a huge difference in their lives. And that would be more of what I would like with 2.0 to be happening. I know it's a miracle to have that happen because I know people don't have time to do that type of stuff, but it would just absolutely make a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in my students' lives. Especially a lot of my students who have done well because they had a mentor of some sort and doing great things with their lives because of that.
And there are a lot of people that are willing to do it. They just don't, it's kind of like when you don't know where to start, you kind of just say, oh, well. So
Maybe we should start a campaign, 5,000 mentors.
There you go.
Let's gain 5,000 mentors. We have 5,000 CTE students. So let's find 5,000.
Like that 1,000 points of light, basically, type thing. That, what's his name, started way back.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Mm-hmm.
I want to add to your point, Crystal, because I think 2.0 for me looks like DC government getting way more involved in the process of recycling their own residents. And I say that because our government DC government rather, is very unique to any other government, and I think in the country, because we're not a state. So the government is very involved and engaged, and there's so many agencies that are doing similar things, but there's no centralized idea to connect people to those opportunities. So I would love to see DC government get involved with bridging the gap between government, industry, and education, because the mayor oversees it all. So if there's a centralized idea where the residents can become certified within DC government agencies, they can then recycle those people to say, okay, well, you don't necessarily have to go to college to get to be successful. We will certify you in this particular area, and then the government then you can become a government employee. We know all the benefits that come along with being government employees. DC has policies that will give DC residents preferential treatment and looks through the job application process. But so many of the residents aren't aware of that. They don't know how to engage in that. So for me, 2.0 would look like DC as a government system, bringing those three entities together and creating a centralized ideal to give residents access to opportunities of success and employment. And not being so segmented, rather. That's very segmented.
That's something I often chew on. Sykes is our resident native, I think, expert on here in this group, maybe. And I know some people that I actually work with is a native, and she came kind of pretty much through SYEP and some other programs. So I know it happens, but there does, to Calvin's point, seem to be a disconnect. Even through my process with buying a house in DC, people didn't know about programs and things of that nature. And it was very easy. It was like, I got moved into a house and I got money back. So that's why access looks funny here to me, because I see the thing that we're trying to create in some way exists, but what's keeping people from it?
The dollars reside here, so it's definitely not the dollars.
They do reside here.
Resides in DC. It's definitely not the money problem.
Man, we used to have the summer youth employment program in Memphis, but they don't have the budget for it anymore. And people I grew up with, we did that program, but we have it here. People are amazed that we have it here. You can do it as early as 14. And the way we leverage it for CTE, Dallas does something similar, a few other cities, but by and large, this is not common. So, well, thank you all. Crystal, I think we about to leave our breakout room.
30 seconds left. Yep,
Any
thank you.
final words?
Also consider, I was going to say, also thank you for participating in the breakout, the conversation. And I would just encourage everyone to think and even email, share with us what you want to do with intention going forward, thinking about access for your students, access for DC as a whole, all of our students, not just the ones in our LEAs. And in addition to that, please look at some of the resources. I'm going to try to put those on. And again, thank you, Sterling, for participating in the breakout.
Thanks, Sterling.
All right, Candace, I think it's all you.
All right, so we had a really good discussion in our breakout groups. Thank you for everyone who participated in the conversation. Real quick, we want to give our note takers, I guess, we'll give just a brief overview of what you discussed in your breakout groups. So breakout group 1, can you share out some things?
Okay, all right. So hey everybody, my name is Mr. Givens. I'm a mass media instructor at Coolidge High School. We talked about creating a pathway for CTE programs to seamlessly transition into post-secondary opportunities. So having like partnerships with universities if possible, and really guiding our students through that whole process. We also talked about the positive aspects of our CTE role and how it impacts our students, right? Seeing the change from students going to school, to coming back to being teachers, to graduating, to impacting their communities. So we just think that CTE has a great impact, and we just want to keep furthering that mission.
Thank you for that. I think that we kind of have a few similar sentiments too. Thank you, Forrest. Breakout room 2.
Okay, I think that was us. This is Kanisha. And we kind of talked about some of the same things, but what stood out to me, Dwayne had mentioned that he wishes that whatever the students would like to take CTE wise, that they could go if it's not offered at their school. But we also know some of the logistics with that schools aren't scheduled. We were also in the room with Mr. Richard, I think Salzman, he's with UDC, and they're already talking about the articulation to be able to go from high school to UDC. So there are things like that in place. And, but just again, our biggest role for, access is, can they all take what they would like to take? And if not, how do we get them interested? And our final thing that stood out was one of our group members felt that the middle school was kind of skipped over. Like there's some things in elementary, not a lot of middle, and then a gang of stuff in high school. How can we, expose them as early as possible to different things so that they have options to choose from?
All right, thank you, Khadijah. What we have in the chat, I've been wanting to do the cross-city CTE classes forever. That's great. You all have some great things. On my other hat, I'm thinking about things in my other role in life. So thank you for that information. And then Crystal, you're gonna share out for room 3.
Sure. We had a great discussion from the time we started to the end. So I'll try to tie up some things in a neat bow. Most of what we discussed was about creating awareness for those in our local and larger DC community about the things that we're doing. And, people not even knowing that some of these programs that they might have matriculated through when they were younger still exist in different spaces. So, opening up your school, attending as many community events as you can, everything from community boards all the way through like the Ed Fest opportunities. And doing something as simple as maybe opening up your track so people feel compelled to come to your space and participate in some of the things that you're doing in that space. Making sure that we have updated website materials, website and materials. And also maybe even looking at like the district, what are our district goals and missions, and what things we want to put out there. Like for instance, not every student will matriculate from high school into college, and making sure that we have visible pathways for every student to create opportunities for success. And I will add that one of the things I loved was the goal of creating mentorship, having some initiative like 5,000 mentors, and everyone working collectively together to create points of contact for each student.
All right, thank you, Crystal, for sharing out for our breakout groups. Y'all, this has been a really good conversation. I think we got a lot of great resources from Sterling. We have quite a few great resources and thought partners. I need to just have y'all sit on my desk some days and think about things we should do and things we need to do. But it's always great to hear the voices of the folks who are doing the work on the ground for certain, especially through our teachers and the folks that work in our schools. So thank you very much for your input and conversation tonight about access.